Welcome, everybody, by today's second panel, Understanding Datapolis, How Data Affects the City and its Citizens. Themes in its panel will be artists and researchers explore how art can help illuminate the way data is harvested, used and exploited in urban environments, and consequently its increasing influence on citizens and politics. We have a panel with 4 guests, actually 5. We have, actually even 6, Nanna, Verhoeff and Sigrid Merx, who will do a presentation together. They're from Utrecht University. We have Disnovation, Maria Roszkowska and Nicolas Maigret. They will Skype in from remote. We have Mina Tarka from IMPAKT out Finland. And we have Vito Boeckx. So this is the lineup. I will say a little bit more about these speakers, but give them a more extensive introduction just before they're about to start their presentation. Nanna Verhoeff is Associate Professor at the Department of Media and Culture Studies of Utrecht University. And Sigrid Merx is a teacher and researcher in Theatre and Performance Studies, also at the Department of Media and Culture Studies of Utrecht University. Mina Tarka is a researcher, producer, critic, and educator of media art and design, and co-founder and director of IMPAKT, Center for New Media Culture in Helsinki. Vito Boeckx is a recent graduate of the Design Academy in Eindhoven and founder of the multimedia studio called Studio Bobo. And we'll start with Disnovation. Disnovation is a working group based in Paris, initiated by Nicolas Maigret from France and Maria Roszkowska from Poland. And they will do a residency at IMPAKT in Helsinki as part of the AMAP 2019 program. Since they are now in residency in the US and cannot be here physically, they will Skype in with the first part of this presentation. Please enjoy.
Hello. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Welcome to our apartment here in the US. And sorry for not being here with you. We are abroad for a few months for residency at the University of California, Irvine. So we are Disnovation, an art collective based in Paris. Presently, we are doing research here at the campus, but we will be back here for this work in Finland. So the series of projects we will present now is looks at the rise, basically, of surveillance capitalism and the influence industry. And basically, we've been looking at how this machine of influence develops on internet and sort of the artifacts that are generated around it, the context where those influence are developing, and also the responses that they generate in civil society and the sort of counter strategies that they generate. Maya will tell you a few more words about it, and then we'll play a short video.
Yes, so the web today has become one of the most important vehicles for propagation of ideas and culture, and also the main source of information and news. Smartphones and hyperconnectivity amplified the rise of online politics and computational propaganda, and it made it easier to manipulate public opinion at massive scale. So the project Online Culture Wars is an attempt to map and make visible a few of these critical aspects of this new online dynamics. This series of free works we present now is a series of critical investigation into a political and cultural online manipulation of opinion. So it's made of 3 projects. The first one is Online Culture Wars, a speculative cartography of online politics. And it's a cartography based on hundreds of weaponized meme elements, based on our researches about online culture wars. And it is just designed as a discussion starter. So it's intent to visibilize and to contextualize these tensions in some of the main political references, actors and influencers. So the second one is profiling profilers. So it's the data extraction it's profiling the data extractivists of the big tech companies. And the third one is an art video that focuses on cultural frictions and conflicts that are amplified or are specific to platforms, forums, and digital tools.
Yeah, so I guess it's a quick intro, and we prepared a 5-minute video for you so that you can have a proper understanding of the range of the project and where we are standing right now. But this project will keep developing for the next 6 months, and the series will be sort of ready to be spread and developed and experimented also online at a full scale. And yeah, we might mention also that a part or a dimension of this project will be sort of performative and will be an actual computational propaganda campaign that we will start together with IMPAKT in Finland. So thank you, and we can perhaps play the video.
Here is a quick introduction to a new series of works. Part 1. Internet Politics. The following series of projects focuses on the new types of online practices, conflicts, and modes of political expression that have been amplified by digital tools, hyperconnectivity, and the constant use of smartphones. Like with physical architectures, digital architectures manifest and encourage their own specific behaviors and political dynamics. In recent years, it has been demonstrated in more than 50 countries that a range of government agencies and political parties are exploiting digital platforms to spread junk news and disinformation, exercise censorship and control, and undermine trust in the media, science, and public institutions at an unprecedented scale. At a time when news consumption is increasingly digital, the manipulation of public opinion over social media platforms has emerged as a critical threat to public life. Here is a non-exhaustive list of methods broadly used for online propaganda: botnets, dark advertising, black propaganda, sock puppets, astroturfing, fake news, junk news, trolling, weaponized memes, anger groups, and more. Presently, we're producing an art video exposing these practices and some of the creative responses that they triggered in civil society. Part 2. Online Culture Wars. From Twitter to Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, Gab, or 4chan, one of the byproducts of online culture wars is the over-politicization of seemingly mundane topics, products, practices, and cultural elements. We started to compile and document the occurrences of this process of over-politicization in the form of a political compass. Here is the resulting map. This map is the result of a superposition of hundreds of politicized memes found online, with an addition of influential political actors and symbols. It is designed as a discussion starter, intended to visibilize and contextualize the ongoing online culture wars and some of the main political references, actors and influencers. Taking the political compass as a framework, this cartography offers a symbolic representation of online ideological and political frictions, which have been subjected to a growing polarization and radicalization, orchestrated by different political and cultural influences in recent years. Part 3. Profiling the profilers. More than ever, the 5 major big tech companies are playing a critical role in the contemporary political crisis. with 80% of global personal data, which they market to private organizations, with almost no regulation. These big tech companies, namely Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft, became pivotal in the shift to so-called post-truth and the influence industry. With the project, Profiling the Profilers, we propose to seize the means of data analytics and create psychological, cultural and political profiles of the most data extractivist big tech companies of our time. To do so, we're exploiting automated big data analysis techniques to extract hidden correlations, resulting in a series of highly detailed and biased digital profiles of big tech companies, similar to the ones constantly generated for each user by these very same companies. Here is an example where we try to extract the political data profile of Google.
Google, LLC, political ideologies, ratio, 31% neoliberalism, 25% capitalism, 12% globalism, 9% libertarianism, 6% distributism, 5% extremism, 4% industrialism, 4% communitarianism.
That's it for now. These 3 projects are in progress, and we're looking forward to develop and tour them with your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicolas and Maria from remote. Now it's time to move on to the first physical present presenters. And I welcome them to the stage to already take their place behind the lectern. Nanna Verhoeff is an associate professor at the Department of Media and Culture Studies of Utrecht University. Her research focuses on screen and interface culture, and she has published on emerging screen media, mobile screens and locative media, media architecture, installation art in public space and urban interfaces. Together with her colleague Sigrid Merx and Michiel de Lange, she leads the research group Urban Interfaces that fosters research on media, art and performance in urban public spaces. They have added a special issue for Leonardo Electronic Almanac, featuring many articles on this topic, which will, again, be released, I assume will be released in 2019. That word was missing from my text, okay. And Sigrid Merx is a teacher and researcher in theatre and performance studies at the Department of Media and Culture Studies, Utrecht University. Her areas of interest are performance, interventions in public space, dramaturgy, performative research methods and scenography. She's one of the core members of the research group Urban Interfaces and of Platform Scenography. She incidentally works as a dramaturg, curator and artistic advisor. Please welcome Nanna Verhoeff and Sigrid Merx.
Yes. We will read from paper, not only to perform our role as academics, but also because we carefully scripted this as a duet.
Second disclaimer. The framing question of this afternoon's session is how data affects the city. However, we do not intend to answer that question. Instead, we want to offer a particular perspective from which one might start address such a question. And we believe that this perspective is valuable both for academics and artists that engage with this question in their work, and also for academics who investigate and analyze such works. And we present this perspective, and maybe this is actually the third disclaimer, without any reference to concrete examples. But we hope that what we propose today will resonate with the concrete practices that will be presented and discussed today after us and already also before us.
So when we take a closer look at the description of this panel, it actually raises 3 related questions. How does data affect the city? How can art reflect on how data affects the city? And how can what we may call urban data art affect the city through this reflection? These questions are about analysis. They are lenses to look at the city, data and data art. But they are also creative questions. They are speculative, as for proposals, standpoints, alternatives, provocations. Moreover, we propose that these questions are dramaturgical questions. And for this panel, we would like to argue for the value of a dramaturgical perspective to think about, look at, reflect on, and also create data art in and for the city.
So we use the word dramaturgy, maybe dramaturgy in a nutshell from its origin in theater studies. There is an interesting definition from Adam Verzenyi, which is also on the slide, saying that dramaturgy is the architecture of the theatrical event involved in the confluence of components in a work and how they are constructed to generate meaning for the audience. We highlighted some of the words in this definition, and maybe unpacking this definition a bit further, what we would like to stress in dramaturgy is the dynamic interaction between composition and spectator, audience, but also that dramaturgy refers to strategies that are employed, in this case by theater makers, to organize the composition and its staging for an audience. And analyzing these strategies, that is to analyze the dramaturgy of a work, a performance, is a way to discuss the possible meanings and possible experiences the architecture or structure of the performance produces. So, dramaturgy forces us to think about how the spatial and material constellation and staging of a work positions a spectator, a participant, or a user, and it does so in a particular way. And through that positioning, it invites certain ways of experiencing and understanding, not just experiencing and understanding the work itself, but perhaps even more importantly, the world the work engages with. Or as Turner and Bernd put it in their book on dramaturgy and performance, if dramaturgy concerns the architecture of the theatrical event, we need to look at the ways in which a performance is situated within the context of a community, society, and the world. So dramaturgical analysis necessarily puts forward the question, why are we performing this right now and here, at this moment in time and space, and for what audience? And what is the link between the work, the world, and its audience? And it's precisely this situatedness that is very important from the perspective of dramaturgy.
So today we want to argue for the value of a dramaturgical perspective that extends beyond the field of theater and performance. We can also speak of the dramaturgy of public spaces. Data itself perhaps has an inherent dramaturgical character. Indeed, both public spaces and data in general can be understood as architectures that produce meaningful relations between material structures and subjects within a certain time, or rather spatio-temporal context. The dramaturgical perspective in the case of urban data art we propose is threefold. The dramaturgy of public spaces, plus the dramaturgy of data, plus the dramaturgy of art in and about public space. So let's briefly look at these dramaturgical layers and their relatedness.
First of all, when we look at urban dramaturgy, dramaturgy as a perspective we propose helps us to understand how public space is a spatial, material, but also discursive constellation that is produced in the dynamic interaction between different subjects, material structures, and immaterial structures. And more specifically, it can help to ask, but maybe also answer questions about how public space, through its political, socio-economic, and discursive organizations, positions and influences its inhabitants and users in how they move through and act within, but also make sense of public space.
Dramaturgy also offers a productive perspective on data. It addresses, makes analyzable, and hence debatable, the embeddedness of data in public space. And this embeddedness refers to the origin, of data as public spaces from where it was given as per the Latin root data. Or perhaps we can better speak of capta, meaning that the data was taken, harvested. Secondly, it is embedded in this space through its subsequent performance. What it produces, its impact on various regulatory infrastructures and interfaces within public space. So data speaks about things and subjects for things and subjects, and as such are used for interpretation, for choices, actions. And as such, data is firmly embedded within a relational dramaturgical network that we can imagine and analyze in abstract, but also discursive and political, or concrete spatial and material terms.
When we then look at the dramaturgy of site-specific urban art, we can say that when data art is being staged within public space, it necessarily engages with the existing dramaturgy of public space. It cannot but work with it, intervene in it, play with it, clash with it. A dramaturgical perspective then enables to understand the relationality of the urban data artwork with the urban context within which it works. It allows to focus on the relations that the work produces with and also between its spectators, and with and within the urban spatial temporal situation where and when this takes place, and also where and when it takes up space. From a dramaturgical perspective, it is also immediately clear how the site specificity of art in public space is not a fixed essence, but should be exactly located in its spatiotemporal and relational character, a site-specific dynamics. Public spaces in the city indeed are fundamentally spaces of mobility, flows, of goods, people and data, of exchanges but also frictions. A dramaturgical perspective helps to see how the work feeds back into its context or spatial cultural bracket. Moreover, it supports an analysis of the quality or nature of this feedback. Does the urban data artwork critique, transform, upset, twist or expose the prevailing structures and behaviors?
Concluding, when urban data art is staged within public space, we recognize that it not only engages with the dramaturgy of public space, but also with the dramaturgy of data itself and how data architectures manifest or intervene in public space. And this dramaturgical sensitivity for us seems to be something that is as valuable and relevant for the analysis of urban data art as for the actual process of designing it. Dramaturgy is an overarching term does not only imply the architecture of a work or event, but also the process of putting that work together and situating it within a particular context. This changes the initial question of this panel from how data affects a city to how can data art affect the city? Or what can urban data art do to evoke the recent Connecting Cities book publications title? What urban media art can do. This makes dramaturgy not only an analytical, but also a strategic perspective for art and design.
So our final question to you would be that we are very much interested in hearing and discussing later on if and how this layered triple dramaturgy informs actual art and design practices and helps shaping urban data art as a strategic intervention in public space. And we're looking forward to talk about that with you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sigrid and Nanna. If there's any immediate questions in direct response to what Sigrid and Nanna have been saying, raise your hands. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next speaker, Mina Tarka from IMPAKT in Helsinki. And Mina Tarka already explained that you are a researcher, producer, critic, and educator of media art and design. In 2000, you've co-founded IMPAKT, Center for New Media Culture in Helsinki. which you're currently directing. At MCult, you have the responsibility, or have had the responsibility, for documentation and publishing of new media culture, as well as several experimental training and development projects relating to mobile and urban media, including used urban spaces and experimental experience design that ran from 2005 to 2007, and several other projects. We're very curious what you will present to us. Please go ahead, and please a warm welcome for Minna.
Thank you. I'm continuing where you stopped. Arjon actually asked me to talk about the experience of the connecting cities, which I'm doing very briefly. So I'm discussing a couple of points and a kind of process that we went through while producing also a festival in Helsinki in urban space. And actually the title of this book, I think it comes from a talk that I made in Istanbul and before that in New York. And the point was there, what urban media can do besides blinking. And this question was a provocation, of course, raising from growing dissatisfaction with the very complicit aesthetics and decorative approach of a lot of urban media art, and very much so when dealing with data. So in the end, then the final publication of this network that I'm explaining briefly soon took a more productive way to kind of say, like, this is how it should be done, and these are the good points, and that's of course very all right as well. So the complicity of a lot of urban media art, as we felt it, it's a lot of complicity with the strategies of surveillance capitalism and platform capitalism. So there is this analogy between what's going on online, as Nicolas and Maria just talked about. And that's why we are very happy to have them to work with us as part of the EMAP residency. And we think that it's really important to scrape and look beyond all the data infrastructures. Naraka Vo was a co-curator from Media Lab Prado in the Connecting Cities network, where we actually produced projects together with various centers across Europe. And she, together with other researchers, she's an architect and a data visualist, data architect as well. So she has been making a lot of great thinking also about smart cities. And here is one really good question that they make, or a kind of definition towards smart cities. And when we were doing this, so this was actually, it feels like a long time ago for me, like urban screens when we were at it, and before that it was locative media and so on. But it's still there, of course, all those smart cities that are like hybrids of or corporate city hybrids and produce a lot their citizens while using big data. So, but Connecting Cities was a network, also EU funded, where we worked from 2010 basically, but in this second round it was from 2012 to 15 to co-produce projects and present them in public space. And the nice thing about that was that we actually really enabled work together with different actors. For example, the Human Being project that is pictured here was co-produced between FACT and Public Art Lab, who was the coordinator of the Connecting Cities, and then us and who was there else. But it was always a set of different actors working together. And there were themes for each year, and we had a local festival where we made our own interpretation of those themes. So, for example, in 2014, there was a theme of participatory city. So that's when, because we had been doing already a lot of participatory urban media, we decided that we would not participate with people so much, but we we created collaborations with natural actors like bees and plants in the public space. So all the images are projects that we realized in part of that project. And increasingly so then came the last edition of the festivals and of the network with the theme Invisible City. And of course that was supposed, or that kind of raised the expectation that, okay, now this is the year of all these data visualizations. To counter that expectation, we decided to really work from the ground up and work from the citizens' perspective even more actively than we had done before. So, for example, the project here was our collective response to austerity politics by the new Finnish government, which is still in power. Nobody believed it then, in 2015. And so we were inspired by the holographic protest realized in Spain, and we created another type of version of the same in Helsinki public space. And I think this is a very important question that we have worked and that has been presented by many researchers as well, like, what is being enabled, whose data, why, and then the next question is how. And I think Nanna and Sigrid just gave one way to work with that question. Also that year we did a bigger commission with Tactical Technology Collective, just to kind of work on a very concrete level with the citizen, with the local communities, NGOs, activist groups. And so there was a workshop where Tactical Tech guided and kind of helped these with designers. We also enrolled designers in the process. So to formulate campaigns that would go on the tram digital screen network in Helsinki trams. And this was a really successful project. We had so much good feedback from the participating organizations. They learned a lot of campaign tactics, and it was all about making other types of knowledge visible, not data, I would say, but before that comes knowledge. And then what was so interesting, and that leads maybe to one of the kind of points I want to make, was the discussions that were taking place during the campaigns when they were made. These NGOs are really experts of their constituency, and they are really careful how to represent those people. For example, and I will show you a little bit of video, if there's time. There's two, good. So you get an idea. I guess you know already Tactical Tech. Anyhow, I'll show you two bits from this longer video. Where's the sound? Can I get sound to the video? Should be. So this is Finnish subtitled, but it's in English, so you'll be able to follow with the sound. Can you get the sound? Should be on. Yeah.
Everything's upstairs is on as well. I'm not sure what it's.
Oh no. Okay. So just a brief simultaneous translation. I'm not showing all of it. I'll speak on it. They work with tactics, so they have created a lot of materials, educational materials, teaching organizations to use data, to work with data, to create campaigns using data, etc. And highly recommended. Also, their website has a lot of materials for that and that they share. And I will just show the last part where some of the campaigns are visible. So we had 6 campaigns, 6 organizations, and then when we presented them, we had different topics, two campaigns every day. So this was about encountering others, the Multicultural Women's Association, and the issues of representation in their case was finding the face that would somehow represent their very diverse constituency of different immigrant women in Helsinki, and they wanted to make their presence visible in the public space. The Alternative Economy Day had a time bank, Helsinki Time Bank as one, and then the FinWatch, which is an NGO looking at fair, fair corporations or working towards fair corporate practices. And then we had a kind of Life on the Wild Side, an environmental organization creating a campaign for the city forests, because in Helsinki forests are really important. And the last one was the Association for Homeless. And likewise, in their case, there was a huge fight about how the homeless are represented. In the end, we chose this Creative Commons photo of Charlie Chaplin, because it was really difficult. They didn't want to portray homeless in some habitus, some kind of form, because the homeless can be whoever. That was their point. So I think the important point that I wanted to make by showing a little bit of these practices was that we really need a data literacies. And Geoffrey Poker, who invited Disnovation to the research residency, is famous for talking about how infrastructures become, when they become embedded, and data infrastructures as well, how they become really, they have a material effect on our everyday life. So those are the things that I want to continue to talk about you in the panel, and maybe we can talk about should we have different urban forensic strategies, how to exploit big data as Disnovation does, etc. So thank you.
Thank you, Minna. I think there's already many topics related to data infrastructures as we can see them online on the internet and in urban environments, and I think we can address the similarities and differences there. An artist that is blending these two kinds of environments is Vito Boeckx. I saw his installation at the Dutch Design Week and the graduation, I think, exhibition it was of the Design Academy. Vito Boeckx founded Studio Bobo, and this is emerging from a background in spatial design. Studio Bobo's projects seek out the boundaries between virtuality and materiality whilst grounding them in a dimensional context. Please go ahead. And please, a warm welcome for Vito.
Hi guys. So I'm going to explain a bit first about myself. I'll see if the presentation works. Does it work? Oh. The audio settings. No worries. Do you think? So I'm Vito. But I have to adjust Arjon a little bit because Studio Bobo, it's still ongoing, but it's a solo project of mine. I started this similar thing basically, but more as a collective kind of thing under the name of Post Neon. So that's just a little thing I want to adjust it. Oh, good.
Second. Should be it.
It's fine. I don't need audio.
No, oh, you don't have.
It's
audio.
fine. I do, but it's fine. I can talk over it. No worries.
It's ready. Yeah, just give me 1 second. I'll put you back on.
Okay. 1 second, guys. And there we go. So yeah, I graduated at Design Academy Eindhoven about a year ago. I graduated with 2 projects. One is called Data Church. The other one is VFX Furniture. Like I just said, I'm busy mainly as a multimedia designer. What I decided to do is just join hands with multiple people that have kind of similar goals and similar mindset and join forces with them. So we created a collective name called Post Neon. It's relatively new, so you will not find a lot about it yet, but more upcoming. But today I'm going to talk a bit more about my project that I did. It's called Data Church. So what Data Church is basically, it is, like you can see here, it's a virtual reality experience. This picture is taken at Vienna Design Week, the last one. So basically what you can do inside, it's a virtual environment where you can roam freely. But what is so related to data about that it is a data visualization. So what I think is very interesting is these two totally opposite or quite far from each other subjects, that is data visualization and virtual reality, which is really immersive, and put these two together and see what comes out of it. But I will just show you guys how it looks, that you get an idea. And then I will explain where it comes from. And boom. We do get audio. So basically you put up the headset and you go into the sanctuary of data, and you will literally see a city growing out of data. The interesting part was that everybody can decide like how he or she looks at it. So some people were really interested to look at it on an architectural scale, like literally go inside it. Other people look at it from a distance. So that was interesting to see how people approach this same city of data in their personal way. All right. So yeah, awesome. There we go. So yeah, how did it start? It started as a collaboration with the City Hall of Eindhoven and Design Academy back in the day that I was there. So we went to a lot of facilities of the City Hall and looked at what they were doing. Data-driven, not data-driven, was really diverse. But I was really triggered by something that they told me was the fact that they want to give everybody free Wi-Fi in the city. And that literally like sparked my brain, and I was like, wow, that's pretty interesting, because if everybody would be on the same Wi-Fi, you could literally have a second skin of the city, but then growing out of data, which is quite an abstract mindset or quite abstract idea, but that's the thing I went for, and that's what you just saw is where it is right now, basically. And the city at that time was quite new. They started building these city beacons in the city of Eindhoven, which is like a step towards that free Wi-Fi for everybody on the same network. So these smart poles, they do quite some stuff, but they sort of give free Wi-Fi to people. And I was thinking, okay, but how can I utilize this data that is being produced there? So what I started doing was, at my home first, I started something called sniffing, which is basically looking at what's going on online. And very dry-wise, you see IP addresses communicating. So at the first glance, you wouldn't really think that it's anything valuable. But at further looking into it, you can actually get quite some data out of it. And what I'm talking about now is passively looking into it. You can also actively looking into it, but I will talk about it a bit later. From passively looking at it, just IP addresses communicating, you can decide the activity of a person, or a device rather. So if you would be online on your phone, you would constantly communicate with other IP addresses. I could see how active you are. I could see where you're going. That's what I mean with destination. So where to which other end you're going, which IP address. And basically, I know that you're on the modem because I could see that modem is triggered with your device. I could sort of roughly have a geolocation of where you are. The whole problem was, of course, the legality of it, of the whole project, basically. As I came from a collaboration with the City Hall and with the government, you could say, and not as a hacker's point of view, I didn't want to go into that illegal part. So I could sort of gray zone area look at what people, like where they were going to Facebook, for example, etc. But I could not see what you're doing on Facebook. That's like a step way too far. So what I did was I went to these Wi-Fi poles and just passively looked at what people were doing. And then instead of looking what people were doing on Facebook, I just asked people with their permission to give me footage of what they were doing online. So I convey the same idea. So what you see here is these towers are the actual data. So whenever somebody was active, a block will spawn under the water. So the more active you are online, the quicker the tower grows. The shape of the tower will also determine where you went to. And therefore you get basically kind of urban landscape out of data of city of Eindhoven in this case. The footage that you see on top is curated to stay in that legal zone that I talked about before. Yeah, and the church part, which is something it's a really big part of the whole project. It came out of I saw a lot of similarities between religion and data and where it's going, especially. So I thought it was interesting to, after doing research, to combine these two and see what comes out of it. So that's basically where I'm at right now. I'm very interested in the panel discussion, and thank you for your attention. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Vito. So I would like to invite all panelists on stage so we can start this discussion. At any point, raise your hand if you have a question or you want to join the discussion with a remark. But first, maybe we get seated. You're free to choose the chair that you like the best. All right. There's a separation here. It's okay. How will that work out? So I have some, I would like also some water, please. I would like to start, if there's no immediate question from the audience, I would like to start with maybe inviting if there's some first things that come to your mind, each one of you looking at the presentations that the others gave, something that you would like to address or that stuck in your mind or you would like to maybe contradict? Is there anyone with a pressing remark in this regard?
I would like to ask a question to Vito. Also, in the comparison between the projects, the VR experience, did you have like a critical agenda for making that? I mean, it's very stunning and it's very interesting to literally make data into a form of architecture. It's used as surfaces in this virtual world. It allows for some form of navigation. At the same time, well, from the video I could not tell in what form the data in that architecture was data or moving wallpaper, so to speak. So maybe you can say a little bit more about your motivation to use data in this way.
Yeah, I totally understand that that question as well, because the main drive that I had making this was to purely translate what's already there. So to this data that was like there, but it's not seen or it's not used yet in just a reflection piece of way, because the part of reflection where you guys talking about it as well, I think that's something that I really miss in data, in the use of data. It's always really practical. So we use data for a practical solution, but I was thinking like, okay, how if we use the data that we have right now and just visualize it, purely visualize it, how can we gain something from that already? So that's like the kind of point of stance that I took in that. So not necessarily that I took a critical side in that, but I just want to see
what happens if you visualize it. That's basically.
But there can be, of course, a kind of criticality in that, I would say,
For sure.
because you're saying I'm just visualizing it.
No,
But
it's
of
also
course, you're not just visualizing it. You're
It's
visualizing it in a very specific form, also this architectural form. But did you already find a kind of beginning of an answer, or did you hear back from people like what it is? In what they experience or how they perceive the data because you present these data in this particular way?
Yeah, it's in general it's quite intense. So it's by the way I visualized it. It's I also use abstraction as a tool so that you cannot literally see like, oh, that person was looking at that, or that was no. I use abstraction as a tool that you cannot really see what people are doing, but you still get an overview of like, oh, this is really what people are doing. So like. That the reaction was really intense. So I think that really the critical points of view from that I'm still figuring it out. So I'm exhibiting quite a lot and seeing what comes out of that. Yeah.
I had the same question to you, but it was answered already. But I can continue by asking you, like, you know, if Vito chose an architectural metaphor, like what led you to, you didn't really say, I think, what led you to choose a theatrical not metaphor, but a method, maybe, or base your method on a theatrical basis.
First of all, yes, it comes from theater, but of course, I think we also try to show that the concept is not limited to theater, and that dramaturgy is something that can be seen in many other disciplines. But what it helps to foreground, I think, what sometimes maybe is a bit overlooked, is the actual staging of the work. So whereas I see that in urban media art, much thought has been given to the work itself, so to speak, and there's all kind of critical potential in that, then sometimes in how that work is actually presented or staged in a context, in a museum or in public space, people have not considered enough what it means to stage it or show it or let it work in that particular context. So dramaturgy, at least for me, is also a way of trying to highlight the situation in which you are showing your work is as much part of that work. And of course, that is very inherent to theater, since it is live performance happening in the here and now, where you constantly have to negotiate that precise fact. And this is not to say that this is not happening in other disciplines or that artists do not consider that, but I think from a background in theater, it helps to foreground that.
Yeah. Well, I think very much like you, but I'm still wondering, because when we actually did the curators of the Connecting Cities, when we finished the project, we did a collaborative writing, and at the end, and I was speaking about context more, like that instead of like thinking about content that we drop into the urban space, we should really think about creating contexts. So I think you're aiming at something similar with this dramaturgy concept, right?
Yes.
But the thing is that I think that the stage is a very fixed space traditionally.
But not at all anymore. I think this is precisely what is. I mean, this is a very traditional understanding of theater.
Classical also.
Very classical, and if you see how theater has been theorized for the last decades, it's precisely this mobility of the stage and the fact that all this is not fixed but in a constant dynamic is very much how theater and performance are being defined, both in practice and in theory.
Point taken.
Maybe we could take Minna's question to maybe expand it a bit and also include Disnovation's presentation, because they primarily address the internet as a data space. You are very much addressing, well, both the architectural urban space and turning that into a data space. And now we're discussing how we should see theater in this respect, and traditional and more expanded notions as you are applying them. I do think there's a lot to learn from what we've seen happening to the internet. If we now imagine a future urban landscape where data is more and more used and applied and harvested, and I'm primarily thinking of, well, there's a lot of differences, meaning that urban landscapes are much more controlled, I would say, than the internet was in the beginning. We've seen the internet turning into a space where there's a lot possible, but there's also a huge influence for a few big companies. And I'm just wondering if we now would look at that, the internet as a data space, and now imagine urban data spaces where I think, where there are a lot of developments emerging, and we should question whether we want governments to maybe control that more, or allow companies to have a lot of freedom, or how we as citizens can use these technologies to maybe cast votes, make ourselves more visible. So these are very big questions, but I'm narrowing it down maybe a bit. What can we learn from looking at the internet when we are looking at the future of urban data spaces? Still too big?
Wow. Audience, maybe.
Yeah, help. Please.
No,
I mean, about the centralization, that part, like, I honestly believe that doesn't work at all. If you give that amount of power to whoever it is, it's just something that doesn't really work. Imagine, I'm thinking about the China part in that, you know what I mean? So,
but we also are seeing what happened to the internet where there's no central regulation, and it makes it creates an environment where the stronger commercial companies have a huge amount of influence. So maybe we would want, at least in every country or on European levels, for data spaces to be more regulated by our governments, just to make sure that they are not colonized by commercial companies.
No, I agree in that. I think some kind of regulation should, but I'm very curious, like what kind of regulation, like what form should that take as well?
What data can be harvested, what kind of visual parts of the architecture can be used for urban screens and whatnot. I remember in the beginning when urban screens was something new, we very much saw it as a very nice area for artworks, but then you also see that you are annoyed when these when the urban environment is occupied by commercial examples. So you're not the only one interested in using that space. So the big question maybe is, how can we make sure that we as citizens benefit in the best possible way from these new technologies in the urban landscape, and make sure that at least there's some regulation when it comes to the question how commercial parties use it and how governments are using it to harvest our data. So I'm pointing at that.
Okay. Maybe we can return to a question that went through the presentations of with that question, which is a very large question, and I would be intimidated to try to respond to it. But what role can art play in this, in not maybe answering that question, but responding to that question? I think the projects that we discussed and looked at do propose ways, and I think that a lot of sort of activist art or critical art, like the main or the go-to strategy is make visible and make debatable the system. And this is a classic but still very powerful way with which art can engage in societal issues, like the huge one that you address. I'm just also at the same time, I feel that art can do much more than making visible and debatable, or it can. But maybe this is a question for all of us. Like, where do we see a role of art within that the problem that you address?
Well, I could give an example. We had an earlier iteration of this panel or something similar last week in Germany with Sander Veenhoff, a Dutch artist, also presenting. He will be there tomorrow in another panel. But he kind of occupied the MoMA in virtual, or I should say, sorry, augmented reality. And I think, the name escapes me, but I know of another German artist, I think, who made a project that also replaced advertisement in public space with artwork.
Julian Oliver.
Sorry?
Julian Oliver.
We worked with him as well.
Only for the people wearing
the
augmented
advertising.
reality. So you might argue, okay, that's not such a big effect, but it's really like something that makes you think of things in a different way. So it's inspiring. And I'm thinking of those kinds of examples that artists could bring to at least enhance the discussion on these topics and inspire that discussion.
And actually, I think it's much more than making visible what's happening, but it's also reclaiming literal space. And as I heard Julian Oliver explaining his project, and that image literally stuck very strongly. It's he said, with this we are reclaiming the visual cortex that is actually hacked by advertisements.
And that's actually what I very much noticed in many of the examples, how many of them had to do with taking back control in a way. So I also think instead of, for me it's difficult to think about the question, should the government control more or not? For me it's interesting to think how art indeed can question that control by taking back control, and also in that way showing that is possible. Because there's also another interesting field of tension, I would say, if we talk about more regulations, that also puts the artist in a rather interesting position, because they are of course also benefiting from the fact that much is possible. And as soon as you start to regulate more, it means that artists also would have to negotiate that, which would maybe limit them in their artistic freedom. But
they would have to become criminals too.
Or
become illegal.
Also a strategy of inversion. I think this innovation is doing that. Like, profiling the profilers. So it's not just like, they have a good campaign or good project structure, because it's like you're first making visible like the map, and then profiling the profilers, making more things visible, and then starting the campaign and hitting back.
Other questions from the audience? If so, please raise your hand. Maybe continuing a bit about like the profiling the profilers issue. I mean, how do we deal with this artistic license? Okay, you say if it gets more regulated, also artists will be more regulated. But I think Vito's project is already an example where he's permitting him. He's doing some things that we would never want the commercial companies to do with our data. So how do you see this legality that you already addressed briefly? But could you maybe continue a bit about that?
Yeah, it's a really tricky zone to be in as well, as an artist or as a designer or as a creative in that field. But I think that having this tension that was there, because I was literally working with the government, you could say. So it was really interesting to see them also actually pushing forward, saying like, yeah, just see what happens, see how far you can push it. But then still, I was blocked by the fact that I couldn't literally see what you were doing online, so that was fine. But in the end, I don't think it blocks artists. I think it kind of forces them to work a way around, and I literally had to do that, work around that problem. So I don't think it would come up with any problem. I think the creativity would push even further to actually make a solution to that block, you could say. Yeah.
So it sounds to me that part of the creative process is also like a detective finding out how the infrastructure actually is regulated working. Sure, so it's
I talked about the forensics, which is online is very like usual method nowadays, not just forensic architecture, but others as well are doing that type of work. So what about like applying that method to the urban data?
Yeah, I think that makes sense, makes complete sense. I think also what spoke from many of the examples is that obviously in order to subvert a system or to critique it, you need to know that system very well. So I saw all kinds of examples of people getting to know the infrastructures very well in order to be able to subvert them. So indeed copying and mimicking certain means and then changing them into something else for another mean. Yeah.
But we need to have this literacy as well, not just artists, but artists can lead the way, like tactical tech. It's really important that you kind of use the artistic permission to distribute these practices as well.
But then I want to say, so the funny part as well is that the infrastructure, as you're talking about the regulation, there's not really yet any clear regulation. So like you're trying to find this infrastructure and trying to dive into it, but the conclusion is like, yeah, it's quite great. There's not really anybody can give you all the answers. So that's quite a contradictory thing you find if you really dive into it. I find myself. So. Yeah.
Do you need grayness? Is that productive?
Do I need grayness, or in general?
The way you used grey, of course.
Yeah,
in that depressing weather kind of.
No,
so ambiguity more like.
Yeah,
which
and
is
the openness of that, or the possibility to navigate.
Yeah, I find it very comforting in a sense, because it's like it keeps it open. It's like you cannot do yes or no. It's just like you just fill it in and see what the reaction is on it. So I found that as it's an interesting place to be, and I think this time as well is really making it possible to be in that space. I think if you look in 10 years, I think it will already be
yeah, because then will happen what you suggested. Then all these regulations will be in place, because that is going to happen, of course. I mean, systems can be open only for a little while, I think.
No, the surveillance governmentality is all over. It's not just corporate. For example, in Finland, nowadays there's a kind of thing called the income registry. It just started, and it's driving all of us mad who are like paying fees or salaries. And it's a way for all authorities, officials, to monitor every penny that has been paid to anybody. And you know, it's a lot of more work. It's a kind of real-time surveillance of small money flows from employees to employers to employees, and you know, also then it makes it makes easier to govern unemployment benefits and social security, all that type of thing. So it's I think we really would need some kind of data schools. And we have some, of course.
We have a Utrecht data school.
Yes, but who are interesting more about analyzing and visualizing data, not so much thinking how you can become critical with them. So I think that's really where art needs to come in, and maybe also that kind of artistic perspective also needs to come in at universities, I would say.
Maybe going back to the ambiguity that we just touched on, data church. For me, it takes a bit the ambiguity out of the project. Or maybe you could tell me more about this religious connotation. I assume that you wanted to establish with calling it a data church.
Yeah,
and the music.
And the
holy music.
I just went full in the church part. No, it has a lot of practical reasons that I went for the church part and didn't call it data city. It would have been more obvious in a sense, but it feels like a sanctuary. Like if you go in there, it feels like a sanctuary in the sense that you go in there and you cannot do. You just witness. You just be. So you have this massive scale data, and you literally just witness it being, growing, doing its thing. So that's one of the main reasons that I thought, okay, that's like the practical reason to call it data church in a sense.
Why not the data sanctuary then?
Yeah,
that would make it a little less problematic for me already.
No, I know what you mean. Because it's very specific, the church as well. Well, the kind of the belief part. Maybe it's because I got raised quite religiously in a church kind of thing. So personally, for me, it made a lot of sense to call it church, in that sense.
I was thinking,
but it's a very good point.
But now it's all.
It's a very good point. But no, the church, the specific point for church, not religion, but church, is personal reasons, because I have that connection with
and
that.
I do see where it becomes problematic, maybe in terms of belief and things, like the connotations of holiness and sacredness.
Well, I mean, as another strand of thoughts, as religion and the internet or the internet and data as a religion, which is not entirely, I think, what you are addressing. So,
sorry. I also had another connotation, though, that it actually, to me, reflected very much, not so much on the data aspect of the work, but more on the sort of the spectacle and the
architecture
of the medium of virtual reality, actually, and the novelty of the medium and the awe that it inspires. Like, oh, you feel truly immersed, and so it's very much about the medium, I think, the work.
Yeah, that's what I meant by it did make sense for me on the level of architecture, like churches or the cathedrals. Let's say it had this, for me, it had this connotations with large cathedrals, also in how you use the lights or reflections.
Yeah,
and then cathedrals are considered to be the very first immersive environments, multimedia environments. So that made sense for me. It's
No, it's more that I understand the specific, because it could be any type of religion, like just the religious part. I was also looking into like how data becomes this kind of new religion, that we are asking our questions towards search engines, and they're knowing us so well after a while, you know, like it has,
like God knows us.
Exactly, like, and just we asking questions and we get the answers from them, you know. So this kind of part was also
I had religious upbringing as well, so I'm familiar with the frame of God looks at you. Yeah, I
what
know
about
how that
data
feels.
sinners?
The data sinners.
Data sinners,
Data worship.
Data sinners. Any questions from the audience? Otherwise, I would like to close the question with this nice idea of data sinners. You can all imagine what that would be, but maybe we should spend some time on it. I would like to thank the panelists. I would like to thank you as the audience. Later tonight we'll have a performance, actually, which I all invite you to attend. But for now, thank you very much, and thanks.
Thanks.